Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Sync podcast, where we explore the value of an inclusive approach in the way we think, work, and engage with our communities and workplaces. Inclusion is about ensuring no one is left behind. Each episode features candid conversations with thought leaders and change makers who are driving inclusive initiatives across various sectors. Our goal is to build a community of individuals and organizations committed to collective and sustainable impact. I'm your host, Nicole Piggott, and today's episode is extra special because my guest is not only a dedicated advocate for inclusion and equity, she's also my sister, Adrienne Piggott. Currently, Adrienne is the Associate Director of Faculty Procurement at McGill University, where she applies her diverse expertise in technology, business analysis, and translation. She serves on the university's Board of Governors and chairs the Joint Board Senate Subcommittee for Racialized and Ethnic Persons. Through this work, she advocates for policies that increase representation, visibility, and equity for racialized and ethnic communities within higher education. She is also the president of the board of directors at Teesri Dunia Theatre, a Montreal-based company dedicated to amplifying stories that are often unheard. Teesri Dunia's mission, changing the world, one play at a time, deeply resonates with Adrienne, who believes that when we see the humanity in others, we begin to understand how interconnected we truly are. We have so much to discuss today. Let's dive in. Welcome, Adrienne Piggott. Well, welcome, AG, Adrienne Piggott, who is our guest today on the Sync podcast. It's great to have you join us on our inaugural year of the Sync podcast. It would not be launched without having a great member of my family. For those of you who know me, I come from a family of advocates and supporters of more inclusive workplace, multi-generationally. And my sister and I were raised in a household that was atypical in terms of the progressiveness that we were raised with, supporting communities, advocating for communities. And so I am so thrilled to have my sister, Adrienne Piggott, join us on the Sync podcast. So welcome, AG.
Thank you, Nicole. It's going to be odd me getting used to saying
you
that.
have to be all formal.
Yeah, I'll try. I make no promises. But
exactly.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really thrilled to be here and so proud of the work you are doing with Synclusiv. So I'm glad you invited me to be part of this inaugural year. But as you said, we come from a family of change makers and people who advocate for people who are voiceless or whose voices are not being heard. And I love that every generation of our family has been doing this work. So true. Glad to be here.
Well, actually, it's a great segue into my first question, which is really, I know your fantastic background, but, share with my audience your journey to becoming an inclusive person or embracing that part of the way we were raised.
I think it's, one of those things where you don't even realize you're doing it until someone mentions that that's what you're doing, in that you're raised in a family where that's just normal. That's what your life looks like. And I think from even early childhood, you recognize the areas in which you are privileged. I think, we often talk about other people's privilege, but I recognize that in our family, we were privileged. We had two brilliant parents who were incredibly supportive, who gave us love and education and access to experiences that many other people didn't have. And that gave me an opportunity to recognize that there were people around me who did not have those same opportunities. So, I mean, from a young age, it was even things like tutoring young people from, economically depressed backgrounds. So I did some of that with friends when I was younger. And then volunteering for the BASF, for which you are continuing Mom's legacy. That was one of the organizations that I volunteered with early on, helping Dad with the QBMA, the Quebec Black Medical Association. And then, moving forward from there into some of my own endeavors where I am now working as, president of the board for Teach Redoing Theater, which is a social justice theater company that tries to bring marginalized voices and stories to the Montreal theater scene. And then, of course, the work I do at McGill as chair of the Racialized and Ethnic Persons Subcommittee, which I've been chairing since 2011.
Wow.
And as member of the board for the university, which I've been doing for, I can't remember how many years now, but also ensuring that the underrepresented voices of the university are heard at the big table where the decisions are made. So yeah, years and years of just
advocacy.
trying to be seen.
And I love how what you're demonstrating is that it's not sort of a linear path. It's not necessarily focusing in just one area of advocacy. You've shown a breadth of areas where you've shown that you can manifest that inclusive voice, that voice of supporting and bringing people in. McGill is an old academic institution. It has a very, a laudable reputation in the academic community. It's well known. It's been immortalized on television. And so I can imagine that change is something that is not necessarily easy to implement in an institution that's actually been rewarded for the structures and systems that it currently has in place. So talk to me about how you take on that role of bringing and progressing diversity, equity, and inclusion in an institution that is a longstanding institution, celebrated institution like McGill University.
Well, as you know, we grew up at the dinner table with Dad, who also a McGillian, our first McGillian, telling us the stories of what he lived as a McGillian joining in 1973. And I can tell you that what we live at McGill is not unlike what happens at most universities. Any university that's not essentially an HBCU or founded for a specific community. Academia is fundamentally a colonial institution. It's designed for a specific demographic, and it's constructed to support that demographic. So there's very much a specific gaze to the way the curriculum is built, to the way the structures are implemented, to the way we support the communities that we support. And it's slow to change because there's been so much praise for what universities bring to the world in their current structure. And so trying to explain to them why that structure is in fact flawed and in many ways just fundamentally and foundationally broken is not easy. I'm not going to pretend that this is an easy road. It's not. I know that there are people who turn around and head straight for their offices when they see me coming down the hall because they know I'm coming to tell them that what they're doing is not okay. And it's always hard when you're asking the people who have benefited from the system to change the system that allowed them to get to where they are.
Yes.
And that's what we're asking universities to do. And this is not just McGill, this is a lot of the universities are going through this reckoning. And trying to get them to recognize how deeply ingrained the issues lie. I think I told you once the story that I try to present to them to give them an understanding of how deeply entrenched this white Western gaze is in the curriculum. And I use the story of the history of opera as my sort of jumping off point to tell them that McGill has a celebrated music school and an absolutely brilliant opera program. And I love the opera program. I've been to the lectures, I go to the performances. We have brilliant students who do extremely well. But when they teach the history of opera, they teach it as though it began in Italy in the 1700s. When in fact, opera began in China 1,000 years earlier.
Yeah.
But they consider that to be Chinese opera, which is somehow different from European opera. But if you look at it, it's exactly the same structurally. The same tropes, the same delivery, the same duration, the same libretto concept, all of it is the same. But of course, Chinese music sounds different from European music, and Chinese stories are different from European stories. And so that's sort of an ethnic thing that they do over there. Opera is European opera, Italian and German, and they don't recognize that that's a huge part of how academia cements and solidifies
And
this
perpetuates.
this non-inclusive, one group made everything, the rest of you benefit from our brilliance narrative. And sort of trying to show this to them, holding the mirror up. Never particularly well received. A lot of pushback, a lot of justification for why I'm seeing it the wrong way, or I shouldn't interpret it that way. I understand, because it's scary. It's scary to be told that maybe you didn't earn your spot. It's scary to be told that maybe things you thought, you could claim as your contribution to the world maybe weren't yours. I get it. But what I think they don't recognize is all of the opportunities as a collective that we would have if we recognized the brilliance that comes from all the pockets of the world.
Exactly. I think that story is so telling, because we see that even, it just, what triggered in my head was pasta. People attribute pasta as sort of an Italian creation, when again,
it's Asian.
It's Asian. And, people don't really make those connections. And those not making those connections dismisses the history and the contributions of others. And in the work that we do, what we see is that it has, multitude of damaging impacts. But one of those damaging impacts is people internalize that history, and they accept that history and are denied even acknowledgement of their own cultural history to greatness. And it's hard to see yourself as part of greatness when your cultural history has been denied in that narrative. So I think that's a great example, because I think you just learned something new, audience. I think a lot of you probably didn't know about the origins of opera. So one of the things that we talk about a lot is contrasts in the workplace, of the demographic of people who are in the, let's say, the worker roles, and then the demographics of the leadership. And we see that stark contrast in the academic world, just like the workplace, or the corporate world. And so talk to me a little bit, because to me, what's the disconnect for me in academia is literally you are developing intellectually and professionally people who should be able to take on the successor role of leadership in your organization. And that pool is getting more and more, and has been for quite some time, quite diverse. And then yet we see not as much change in the representation of leadership in academic institutions, with the exception, I would say, we're starting to see more white women moving into senior leadership roles in academic institutions, but beyond that, not much else. So talk to me a little bit about what you think, why that is, and what needs to change.
Well, it's a bit of I'll use the local expression, cordonnier mal chaussé. So we develop the research. We engage in the research. We produce the research that demonstrates the value of diverse lived experience, diverse thinking, diverse, all of the ways in which diversity can benefit institutions and organizations. We publish that research, but we don't implement it for ourselves. And that's true, I would say, almost across the board. I've worked in various areas. As you know, I was in IT in my earlier part of my career, and we did not implement the findings of IT in our own internal IT systems either. We don't learn from the research we do ourselves. Yes, I mean, it's kind of funny well, it would be funny if it wasn't so damaging at times. But I think what happens as well is in a lot of academic circles, there's a sense of, yes, that's what's happening out there. These are the problems of the out there that we study. These aren't the problems of the in here, because we're academics and we clearly must know better. So we aren't doing those things. There's a real reticence to turn that gaze inward to see, wait, am I also doing the things that society is doing? Yes, you are part of society. And so you are experiencing all of the same, you know, patterns, and you also live in the same soup that the rest of the world you're in lives in. So
Absolutely. You're educating the people who are going out and modeling those behaviors in society. Why do you think that somehow they walk outside the door and become someone else, and there's someone else within your institution? You're part of the fabric of those systems and processes that sustain the status quo. So,
there's
yeah, so
also a
then
really
go
there's
ahead.
also a really narrow view of excellence, and that's part of
Uh,
the problem.
yeah.
So I think there's this sense of, when you're reviewing someone's application or someone's, path to leadership in a university setting, what internships have you had? Who have you worked under? Who was your supervisor? Well, if you come from, sub-Saharan Africa, what access did you have to being mentored by a Henry Mintzberg at the School of Management at McGill? What access did you have to the big names that people have seen to study under? It's far more limited than the person who was raised in affluence in, the global West or the global North. Obviously, those students have greater access to the things that academia already recognizes as excellent. And so changing that mindset that there are other ways to view excellence, that the knowledge keeper from the indigenous community that kept the language alive against all odds is a demonstration of excellence.
Mm-hmm.
That the person in sub-Saharan Africa who's managed to find creative ways to create an economy to keep their community afloat is excellence. All of these things that aren't looked at on paper as being demonstrations of excellence. There's a template that they use.
It's funny you should give those examples, because one of the things that I often prompt people to think about is what it takes for someone who A, doesn't see themselves in the examples of excellence, in the models of excellence that are presented to them. B, is essentially navigating systems that were not designed for them to be able to be successful and to excel. And yet they do. The muscles, the skills, the competencies that those people need to have built and demonstrate is excellence in of itself. And so what you're already getting from that person is something you're not getting from, which would be complementary to someone who hasn't had to do all those things. So you like imagine the power of having those two profiles together doing work versus someone who just has one of those profiles doing that work. And that's really what I want people to think about. The multiplier effect of the two different experiences and profiles to excellence versus the same old, same old. It to me, it's so patently obvious, but this is the dialogue that we need to be having with folks to help them to understand. So
So
I'm gonna go
I
ahead.
just wanted to add on that
Sure.
just something briefly, a little sort of story of how I'm trying to push that a little bit within the student group at McGill, because I've had the opportunity to host a number of what we call community citizenship sessions on campus. And one of the things that I did with those was,
So what are community citizenship sessions?
so community citizenship sessions are where we bring in people who are about to become Canadian citizens who come through what I would call the more difficult paths, whether it's refugee claimants or people who've come through the longer process of family sponsorships of people from I would say, the global south, or people who come from difficult circumstances or fleeing conflict. And they come together and we host citizenship ceremonies for them where the community welcomes them in. And the way we do that is they come in, we have a big discussion about their journey with people facilitating conversation at the table. We usually have an Indigenous elder do an actual welcome to the land so that they actually meet an Indigenous person who will speak to them and welcome them to Canadian soil. And then we have their ceremony, and then we celebrate their becoming a Canadian citizen. But what I like to do is also invite a student who is most likely born in Canada or born, into the global north, to come and facilitate those sessions, but also to hear those stories. The first time I was invited to do this, it resonated with me because, as you know, I'm the only member of our immediate family who was born in Canada. So you, mom and dad, were born in the Caribbean and I was born here. So I had not had the immigrant experience. I arrived in Canada as a Canadian. But I thought it was important for our students to hear what it takes for someone who potentially has left their family behind for sometimes a decade as they attempt to make their way in Canada, build roots, find a job, get a home, find community. For many of them, they hadn't even seen their family in all that time, because until they became citizens, they didn't have a passport if they were a refugee. They didn't have access to going back, and their family couldn't come see them because it wasn't safe. And they made all of those sacrifices to build that opportunity for themselves. And the day of becoming a citizen was the day that all of these doors were opening for them. Obviously, it's an extremely joyous and moving experience, but I also think it's important for the younger people that I would invite to see the immense amount of resourcefulness and tenacity and effort and creativity it takes to start your life over in a new country, when many of them arrived knowing no one.
And sometimes, and not even knowing any of the languages of Canada. So, or sorry, the English or French. The strength of character, the courage that it takes to leave all what you know behind for the unknown on the basis of a hope, on simply the basis of a hope of a future, it takes a huge amount of courage. And I think people don't take the time to really reflect on that. So I think that's a great way of helping people without ramming it down their throats, without talking to them about it. Let them experience and hear it firsthand out of the mouth of someone who's lived it, what that journey feels like. So just so that for my audience, my father got a scholarship at University of Toronto, comes from a very, very, a family that struggled economically all of their lives. Like, my grandfather was a migrant worker in the southern United States during the 40s and the 50s and 60s and frankly 70s. And so you can well imagine what that was like for him. And he developed a perspective on white people, on North American society and the power structure. And he and his wife, my grandmother, raised 9 children who have all economically moved up at least into the middle and upper middle class. And so this is really a testament to that commitment and frankly sacrifice that a lot of immigrant parents make in order to provide opportunity for the next generations of their family. And this is something that those of us who live in a privileged life don't really appreciate, the privilege that we have and the journeys that people undertake. So let's shift gears here, and I'm going to go there. Universities have historically been the place of curiosity, challenging the power structures, questioning the powers that be, often much like journalism, shedding light on injustice and bringing truth to light. And in the last while, we've seen an odd dynamic evolving in university campuses, frankly, across the Western world, where there's been a shift sort of questioning the behavior, the notion of challenging power structures, manifesting your right to protest. And so what are you seeing evolving, and why do you think this paradigm shift has occurred? And where is that disconnect coming from?
Money. It's where all the shifts come from. I mean, to be perfectly honest, what we're experiencing now is in part, the backlash against intellectualism, which we're seeing, widespread. And yes, the internet has some part to play in that. But I also think it does come back to the democratization of education is beneficial for those of us further down on the food chain, but it's not beneficial to the people at the top of the food chain. There's a definite problem if we all know things. So there's, to my mind, clearly a money motivation behind why dissent is being pushed down on now. But I also think that what's happening is toppling long-standing institutions, being willing to stand up and say, wait, that's not okay, in the ways in which we are doing it now, is a little bit different from the way it happened in the past. And what I mean by that is, again, in part because of the internet, we see each other now. So I may not have seen what was happening in Palestine or in Ukraine 50 years ago, but tribalism has shifted now. We're no longer just concerned about the person who lives next door or the person who is from the same, ancestral lineage that we are from. For many people, our community is the people who are aligned with us morally, ethically, culturally, from sort of a geopolitical sense. So all of a sudden, the people who are rising up to say that's not okay aren't just the people who have ties directly to Palestine. It's people like me, people like my Jewish partner, people like all kinds of people, because we can see now in a way that we couldn't before. And so not only are the numbers of people who are standing up growing, but it's also much harder to dupe them, to tell them what's happening versus them knowing what's happening, seeing what's happening. And so the need to control it has grown. The need to stamp it down has grown because we can actually find out for ourselves.
Right.
We can rally much more easily. I could reach out to someone who's not in the same classroom as I am, who's in another school, who's in another town, who's in another country, and tell them this is happening here and I need help. And I think, again, it's another one of those moments where we are definitely upsetting the structures that have allowed the people who've maintained power to maintain it. And that is a big part of why I think there's this need to quell the dissent. You'll notice that when they passed the legislation to protect academic freedom, the things it protected was the right of people in power to say terrible things about people who've always been marginalized. But in this moment of, huge support for ending the genocide in Gaza, for ending, the land grab in Ukraine, what you're hearing is, that sounds a lot like you're against this group of people. None of what I said had anything to do with the group of people. It had to do with, you need to stop slaughtering the folks that you've kept in an open air prison for 70 years. But again, because this is the way of trying to maintain the status quo that keeps those people who have benefited from the system able to benefit from the system. So
Yeah. I think what I'm hearing from you is much what we hear when we hear the backlash just generally against equity, diversity, and inclusion. This notion, I think it's fear of the disruption, fear of the change, fear of to your point, what does that mean for me, myself, and I? This world I know, this is the world I've benefited from, and therefore do not touch this world, please. And what you're raising the injustices, the frankly, um, the violence, the inequities is shaking and shattering my perception of myself and where I fit in this world. And because it evokes fear in me, my first reaction is to fight back against
to
that fear
resist.
or what we think is the cause of that fear. And I think the whole reaction of the power structure of these institutions or the donors of these institutions against students who are protesting and doing what students do, folks. Just so that you know, when I was on campus, I don't think any one of us who's been on a campus in the last 60 years has not known some kind of protest occurring on campus. That is part of the university experience. It always has been, way back to the 30s, way back to, the suffragette movement, way back. That has been a part of these sorts of institutions. But there was always a sense before that the power structure was not going to be shaken by the things that you were fighting against, because it would still keep a small pocket in that space and not necessarily a large group of people. And to your point, with social media bringing the world closer, all of a sudden the sheer numbers is intimidating. The sheer support is intimidating and destabilizing. And we haven't really given the tools to the power structure, and the power structure hasn't developed the tools to navigate the new world that
Yeah.
we're occupying. We've adapted, or we've like capitalized on this, but some of these folks, because the status quo is very comforting and it served them well, are a little slower to say, how do I adapt to this new world? So let's talk a little bit about, being in a part of an institution that really is the last stepping stone for a lot of people into their future adult lives, their careers, their professional lives. And in some cases, like in my case, even your personal life. I met my husband at McGill. Actually, I didn't meet him at McGill, but we were both McGill students. But
She met him on the bus.
I did meet him on the bus. But 30 plus years later, 2 kids later, clearly that bus was a monumental point in my life. So, what advice would you have? Because I know you do a lot of mentoring of students, you do a lot of support for students. So, what is the advice that you have for students who are leaving the academic world and moving into the workplace on two fronts? On how do you navigate that shift? It's a very different world from the student life to the professional life. But also, how do we make sure that some of this empathy, this awareness of these imbalances is actually something that they carry through in their careers and become, like us, advocates, allies, and change makers?
Well, it's interesting you should say that. Last week I was at the thesis defense of one of the students who'd been in my subcommittee, who has secured her spot in a tenure track position at a
Woohoo!
university at Manitoba, who's absolutely brilliant. I'm so proud. But what I have always told them is know your worth.
Mm.
Imposter syndrome is a problem, I think, that some, women suffer from, people of color can suffer from. But part of that is to, to come full circle, internalizing some of the experiences that you've
Mm-hmm.
had and some of the lessons you've been taught, and learning to shake that off and to recognize your worth. You are smart, you're capable, you're deserving, you're worthy, and take that with you out into the world because it's true. If you made it through McGill, believe me, you are worthy. Whatever you get out in the world, you've earned, and own that because it's true. The other thing I tell them is community. It's really important to have people that you don't have to explain the details of your lived experience to. I still meet regularly with a group of people who I don't have to tell them when someone has said something that I know exactly what the subtext of that sentiment was. They know. And I don't have to justify or explain why it's upsetting and why I'm hurt by it. They understand. And having that community of people who will validate your experience, will help you to navigate it, will give you new tools that maybe you didn't
Yeah.
have, incredibly important, incredibly centering, because there's a lot of, I always call it the sanity check. There's a lot of questioning. Maybe it is me. Maybe I am being the one who's too sensitive. Maybe I'm overreacting. And it's good to have community who will tell you, no, that thing that you experienced is real. It happened and it's not okay. It makes a huge difference in how you approach your next step, because then you feel strong and firm when you confront the situation, when you go back and say, that thing you did, it's not acceptable and you shouldn't do it again. And I won't accept it if you try to do it again. Be a little bit fearless. It can feel hard,
Mm-hmm.
but it's worth it in the end, because you want to walk away from every situation with your self-esteem and your dignity intact. It's easy to lose that if you let people wear you down. So sometimes you just have to speak up, and there might be a consequence to it, but it's usually worth it. I've had my heart racing in meetings where I knew I was about to say something that I recognized would have consequences, but I had to say it. So I did. And I just decided that if it led to a difficult moment for me in the future, I was willing to take those lumps, because I couldn't let what had just transpired sit there unaddressed. And so I did those things. And then sometimes you have to you have to take it upon yourself to do something that in other circumstances you recognize other people wouldn't have to do, because you have an opportunity to make space for yourself, for your community, for others who maybe are more marginalized than you are, who don't have the access and the privilege that you have.
I think you've just shared such powerful tools for, I think, frankly, for people who are starting out their careers, but equally for people who are already in their careers. I can tell you, as someone who's on the other side of the mountain in terms of my career, I'm nearing the end of what I would say, a long career. And I realized, looking back in that rear view window, the number of times that I've catastrophized a situation where I thought, if I do this, like the absolute worst thing is going to happen to me. And one of the advantages, frankly, of doing that is seldom did I ever experience anything that was even close to the absolute catastrophe that I had envisaged as a result of the decision I was going to make to speak up or to push back or to reframe something. And so one of the things that is I found has been very helpful, and this is to build on Adrienne's concept of community, is I often, and Adrienne knows this because she's a very close and intimate part of my sounding board, I go back to that community and I will play out a scenario and I say, okay, this is what I want to do. And how does this sound? Is this too abrasive? Is this triggering? Like, is there a way that I can say this that is better, will be better received? And you can use that community to help you to play this out in a way to achieve the goal that you are looking for. And sometimes that means also taking a step back to say the goal is not to be self-righteous. The goal is to affect change and to bring about the objective that you are seeking. And sometimes it means not getting the validation or the getting that righteous anger validated by the exchange that you are going to undertake. So that's where your community can serve to vent, get it off your chest, and then say, what's my game plan? So excellent, excellent suggestions and recommendations. The last thing I would add to what Adrienne is saying is, as you move up the echelons, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget the experiences that you had, that you have the power when you reach those senior echelons, as Adrienne has, as I've been fortunate to do as well, to look around you and say, whose path am I going to ease the way for, as because I now have the power to be able to do that. Your struggle does not have to be the struggle of everyone who follows you. In fact, your obligation and responsibility as someone who has overcome those struggles is to look around you and figure out who you're going to help ease their struggle to get to move forward. And that's from my mother, Adrienne, and our mother drilled this into our heads. She is someone who was an advocate for women and other underrepresented groups paving their way. She was often the one who would go and take the brunt of the knocks on the chin because she'd speak up on the other person's behalf to help to pave the way for them. So do that if you have the power to do that. So we're reaching the end of our segment on the Sync podcast. And we always end our segments with a last question that we call the Sync Spotlight. And it's really the question is really around, how do you ensure that you are living those values in everything that you do as you are navigating the academic world, which is not easy, the context that you're in. Sometimes I'm sure you feel it'd be easier to just say, oh, I need a break. So how do you continue to keep those values alive and manifesting them in the way that you live your life?
I would tell you that the biggest part for me is that none of this is about me or for me at this stage. It's about the community. I recognize that still in this world, having the right degree from the right university makes a difference. It opens doors for people. There's no question. Saying you graduated from McGill in the world today is still a passport that will take you further than saying you graduated from a community college in some random town in the US. That's just facts. And for me, what bolsters me and keeps me going and ensures that I remember that that's the mission is that I check in with the students that I mentor regularly and see how they're doing. When I get invited to a thesis defense from a student that was in one of my committees and invites me to see their moment in the sun of getting their doctorate, all of these moments, I go to every convocation. Dad thinks I'm crazy, but that to me is the moment where I see the culmination of all that effort. None of what I do is about me. I don't care if no one ever says, Adrienne made this happen. I don't care. It makes no difference to me. What I love to see is more students making it through the McGill process successfully, and then telling their younger sibling, you can come to McGill, you'll be okay, you can do it, and then you can go out into the world and affect change. Every time I hear a story of success, every time someone says to me, you know what, it was easier or better than I thought it would be. To me, that's all that matters, that the road was made easier for someone. And it's easy to live those values because those values are about seeing the potential in someone grow and come to fruition and then grow further, watching the world become a better, I get to watch the world become a better place in real time. It's an incredible, incredible privilege. It's not hard to keep that momentum going. And you don't need to work in a university to do it. Just find your space where you know you can be effective and you'll see it for yourself. I know you do. I know your daughters do. Dad always said his legacy was his students, and he still says that now. And that's definitely something that I feel every time. I mean, we didn't touch on it this time, but even when I work with the theater company, when a young playwright's play gets performed, I'm like, what else do I need? Like, this is all joy. So,
I love that because folks, this is another value that was instilled in us. It's never been about us. What we achieve, we get enough validation. We have a fantastic family, and I get all the validation I need and the accolades I need from the family that I have and the people I love and care about who think that I'm pretty terrific. And so I don't need that. What I do want to see is a better world. I want to see a world where we are able as a society to achieve our full potential and that people are able to be their best selves in the world and take their place in the world. That's the world that I try to build. And to your point, AG, it's not about us. It's about what we can do and what we can affect. So, this has been wonderful. We seldom get a chance to sort of deep dive into some of these topics, despite the fact that Sunday dinner at the Piggott House, and that's the extended family all comes together for Sunday dinner. We talk about some of these issues that are going on in the world, but we never really spend time talking about our journey and the things that we've done. So it's been a real opportunity for me to get a real window on your journey. So for the audience, I want you to know that we will provide all the contact information for Teasery so that you can go and check out these fantastic plays. And also Adrienne's contact information so that if you want to connect with her, you can. But I just want to thank you, Adrienne, for being part of this podcast series. I knew you were fantastic and brilliant, but now the world gets to see that I'm surrounded by fantastic, brilliant people, and we all can play a role in the worlds that we occupy to make more inclusive workplaces and spaces. And so please like and subscribe to our podcast series and come see us again. We will continue to have more brilliant people like Adrienne Piggott on our podcast. Take care.
Thanks, Nikki. Have a great one. Thanks for inviting me.
Couldn't do it without you. Thanks for tuning in to the Sync podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The Sync podcast is brought to you by Synclusiv, where we're building inclusive workplaces that work for everyone. To learn more about how Synclusiv can help your organization create real, measurable change, visit synclusiv.com. Until next time, stay in sync.